Newlywed couple smiles in 1911, but the restoration of the photo revealed someone dead who shouldn't be there. Have you ever looked at an old photograph and felt something was wrong? Today, I'm going to share with you a story that will make you question every vintage photo you've ever seen. It's about a wedding photograph from 1911 that revealed something impossible during its restoration. Someone who was already dead appeared in the image, standing among the living. Before we dive into this chilling tale, if you enjoy mysterious stories like this, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Also, I'm excited to announce that I'm developing another channel focused on historical mysteries and unexplained phenomena. The link is in the description below, so make sure to check it out after this video. Now let's step back in time to 1911, to a small town in Massachusetts, where what should have been the happiest day of a young couple's life would become the beginning of a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. The autumn rain drummed steadily against the windows of Henderson's photo restoration studio in Salem, Massachusetts. Sarah Henderson adjusted her magnifying glass, peering closely at the century-old photograph that had arrived that morning. The sender, Margaret Whitmore, had included a note explaining it was her great-grandparents' wedding photo from 1911, discovered in an attic after her mother's passing. The photograph showed a young couple, the bride in an elegant Edwardian gown with intricate lace detailing, the groom in a crisp black suit with a high collar. They stood before the altar of what appeared to be the old St. Mary's Church, which Sarah recognized from historical records. Behind them, wedding guests were arranged in formal rows, their faces bearing the serious expressions typical of early 20th century photography. Sarah began her meticulous work, using specialized software to remove the yellowing, water stains, and age spots that had accumulated over 113 years. As she worked, she noticed something peculiar about the photograph's composition. The lighting seemed uneven, with certain areas appearing darker than others, particularly around the left side of the church, where several guests stood. "That's odd," she muttered, zooming in on the darker section. Early photographers often struggled with lighting, but this seemed different, almost as if this portion of the photograph had been deliberately obscured. As the restoration progressed, layer by layer, the hidden details began to emerge. Sarah's fingers paused over her keyboard as a figure materialized in the previously darkened area. It was a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, wearing a distinctive brooch shaped like a crescent moon. Her dress, now visible through the restoration, was notably different from the other guests, simpler, almost austere. But it was the woman's expression that made Sarah's blood run cold. While everyone else gazed toward the camera or the couple, this woman stared directly at the bride with an intensity that seemed to pierce through time itself. Her eyes held something Sarah couldn't quite define: sorrow, anger, warning. Sarah reached for her phone, dialing Margaret Whitmore's number. "Mrs. Whitmore? This is Sarah Henderson from the restoration studio. I'm working on your photograph, and I've discovered something unusual. There's a woman in the image who wasn't visible before. She's wearing a crescent moon brooch. Do you know who she might be?" The line went silent for a long moment. When Margaret finally spoke, her voice trembled. "A crescent moon brooch? My God, that sounds like Elizabeth Hartley. But that's impossible. She died 3 weeks before the wedding." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she stared at the restored image on her screen. The woman with the crescent moon brooch stood there, as clear as any other guest, her haunting gaze forever fixed on the bride. "Mrs. Whitmore," Sarah said carefully, "I think you need to come see this." Margaret Whitmore arrived at the restoration studio the following morning, accompanied by her daughter Emma, a journalism professor at Salem State University. The rain had given way to a thick fog that seemed to muffle the sounds of the city, creating an eerie atmosphere that matched the mood in the studio. Sarah had prepared everything meticulously. The original photograph lay on a light table next to high-resolution printouts showing the restoration's progress. Most striking was the final image, where Elizabeth Hartley stood among the wedding guests, impossible yet undeniable. "This can't be real," Margaret whispered, her fingers trembling as she traced the outline of the mysterious figure. "Elizabeth was my great-grandmother's younger sister. She died of tuberculosis on September 15th, 1911. The wedding was October 7th. Emma leaned forward, studying the image with academic precision. "Mom, are you absolutely certain about those dates?" "Positive," Margaret replied. "I have Elizabeth's death certificate in my genealogy files at home, and her obituary from the Salem Evening News. If you're finding this story as intriguing as I am, remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything." Sarah pulled up her research from the previous night. "I've done some digging into the history of St. Mary's Church. According to the archives, there was indeed a Whitmore-Coleman wedding on October 7th, 1911. Your great-grandparents, Eleanor Whitmore and James Coleman. But here's where it gets stranger," Sarah continued, switching to another screen. "I found Elizabeth Hartley's burial record. She was interred at Harmony Grove Cemetery on September 18th, 1911. The funeral service was held at St. Mary's, the same church where this wedding took place 3 weeks later." Emma pulled out her notebook, her journalistic instincts kicking in. "We need to approach this systematically. First, we verify that this is actually Elizabeth in the photograph. Then we explore every possible explanation." Over the next several hours, the three women pored over family albums, comparing facial features, identifying clothing styles, and cross-referencing with other photographs from the era. Margaret had brought a small photograph of Elizabeth taken just months before her death. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same delicate features, the same dark hair styled in the Gibson girl fashion, and most tellingly, the same crescent moon brooch pinned to her collar. "This brooch," Margaret said softly, "was Elizabeth's most prized possession. It was a gift from her fiancé, William Morrison. According to family stories, she was buried wearing it." Sarah felt her mouth go dry. "Buried wearing it? Then how—" Emma interrupted. "Let's not jump to conclusions. There could be rational explanations. Double exposure, perhaps, or maybe someone else wore the brooch to honor her memory." But even as she spoke, Emma's scientific skepticism wavered. The figure in the photograph didn't have the translucent quality typical of double exposures. Elizabeth appeared as solid and present as any other guest, standing in a specific spot, casting a shadow consistent with the lighting. Sarah magnified the image further, focusing on Elizabeth's face. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the screen. "See how the other guests' eyes reflect the camera's flash? Elizabeth's don't. They're completely dark." The room fell silent, except for the hum of the computer equipment. Outside, the fog had thickened, obscuring the street below. Margaret finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something else," she said. "Family legend says that Elizabeth and Eleanor had a terrible argument just before Elizabeth fell ill. Elizabeth was in love with James Coleman first. When he chose Eleanor instead, it broke her heart. Some say that's what made her susceptible to the tuberculosis." Emma scribbled furiously in her notebook. "We need more information. Church records, newspaper accounts, anything from that time period that might shed light on this." As they prepared to leave for the Salem Public Library, Sarah made one last observation that sent chills through all three women. "There's one more thing I noticed. Look at where Elizabeth is standing in the photograph. She's positioned directly behind the bride, and if you follow her line of sight—" Sarah traced an invisible line from Elizabeth's dark eyes to Eleanor's neck, where an ornate pearl necklace rested. "She's staring right at Eleanor's throat." The Salem Public Library's historical archive room smelled of old paper and leather bindings. Emma, Margaret, and Sarah had been granted special access to the collection, thanks to Emma's academic credentials. They sat at a long oak table, surrounded by boxes of documents from 1911. Leave a comment below about what you think of this story so far. I love hearing your theories and thoughts. "I've found something," Emma announced, carefully extracting a yellowed newspaper from a protective sleeve. Salem Evening News, September 16, 1911. Elizabeth Hartley's obituary. She read aloud, "Miss Elizabeth Hartley, aged 22, passed away yesterday evening after a brief but severe illness. The daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Charles Hartley of Essex Street, she was known for her charitable work and gentle disposition. She is survived by her parents, her sister Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, and her fiancé Mr. William Morrison. Services will be held at St. Mary's Church on September 18th. Brief but severe illness," Margaret repeated. "The family always said it was tuberculosis, but that usually isn't so sudden." Sarah had been examining a different box and suddenly gasped. "I found something extraordinary. It's a collection of letters donated by the Morrison family. Look, they're between William Morrison and Elizabeth Hartley." The women huddled together as Sarah carefully unfolded the fragile paper. The letter was dated September 10th, 1911, just 5 days before Elizabeth's death. "My dearest William, I write to you with a heavy heart. As you know, Eleanor's wedding approaches, and I find myself consumed by emotions I dare not speak aloud. To see James with her, to know what might have been, tears at my very soul. I dreamt again last night of that terrible day when James told me of his choice. In my dream, I stood at their wedding, though I know I could never bear to attend in truth. The crescent moon brooch you gave me seemed to burn against my skin, as if it knew the betrayal I felt. I fear, my darling, that I am not well. This cough that has plagued me grows worse, and I feel a darkness creeping into my chest. Perhaps it is merely heartbreak manifesting in physical form. The doctor says I must rest, but how can I rest when my thoughts torment me so? I have made a decision. If I cannot attend the wedding in life, then I shall not attend at all. It would be too painful, too final an acknowledgement of what I have lost. Forever yours." Elizabeth Margaret's hands shook as she set down the letter. She was already ill, and she explicitly said she wouldn't attend the wedding. Emma found another letter, this one from William to Elizabeth, dated September 14th, the day before her death. "My beloved Elizabeth, your condition worries me greatly. The doctor's report is more serious than you led me to believe. Please, my darling, you must fight this illness. Do not let heartbreak claim your life. I have spoken with Father Mackenzie, and he has agreed to say special prayers for your recovery. He also mentioned something curious. He said you came to him last week speaking of dreams and visions. You told him you saw yourself at Eleanor's wedding, standing in the shadows watching. He was concerned by the intensity of your words. Elizabeth, you frightened him. You said, 'I will be there, William. One way or another, I will be there to see what should have been mine. Please, my love, rest and recover. These dark thoughts do not become you. With all my devotion, William.'" The library seemed to grow colder as they absorbed the contents of the letter. Sarah was the first to speak. She told the priest she would be at the wedding one way or another, and then she appears in the photograph, 3 weeks after her death. "There has to be a logical explanation," Emma insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe someone else stood in her place as a memorial. Maybe—" She was interrupted by Margaret's sharp intake of breath. The older woman had found another document, a handwritten note in the margin of the church's wedding registry. "Look at this," Margaret whispered. "It's in Father Mackenzie's handwriting." The note, faded but still legible, read, "Strange occurrence during the Whitmore-Coleman ceremony. Several guests reported feeling a sudden chill when the photographer prepared his equipment. Mrs. Coleman complained of feeling faint, claiming someone was standing behind her, though the space was empty. Most peculiar, the photographer, Mr. Josiah Blackwood, insisted he saw a figure through his lens that was not visible to the naked eye. Mass hysteria? Or something more? I pray for answers." Sarah cross-referenced with her notes. Josiah Blackwood was one of Salem's most respected photographers. He wasn't given to flights of fancy. Emma found one final piece of correspondence, a letter from Eleanor to a friend, dated October 10th, 1911, 3 days after the wedding. Dearest Catherine, the wedding passed in a blur, though something troubles me still. When Mr. Blackwood took our photograph, I felt the strangest sensation, as if Elizabeth were standing right behind me. I know it sounds mad, but I could swear I smelled her lavender perfume and felt the touch of cold fingers at my throat. James says it was merely wedding nerves, but the photographer seemed quite shaken. He mentioned something about an extra figure in his preliminary view, though we all assured him it was a trick of the light. I cannot shake this feeling of unease. Last night I dreamed Elizabeth stood at the foot of our bed, still wearing that crescent moon brooch, her eyes dark as coal. She said nothing, only stared, but I woke gasping for breath, my throat aching as if someone had been pressing upon it. Perhaps I am merely suffering from guilt. Elizabeth was my sister, and I knew of her feelings for James, but the heart wants what it wants, does it not? I pray time will ease these troubles. Your friend, Eleanor. The three women sat in stunned silence, the weight of the historical documents pressing down upon them. Outside, the fog had lifted, but the late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the library windows. We need to see the grave, Sarah said finally. We need to go to Harmony Grove Cemetery. Harmony Grove Cemetery sprawled across 53 acres of Salem, its ancient trees casting twisted shadows across weathered headstones. The late afternoon sun struggled through the canopy as Sarah, Emma, and Margaret made their way along the winding paths, following the cemetery map to the Hartley family plot. If you're enjoying this mystery, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the conclusion. The caretaker, an elderly man named Thomas Garrett, had agreed to meet them at the grave. He walked with a slight limp, his knowledge of the cemetery's history encyclopedic after 40 years of service. The Hartley plot is one of our older sections, Thomas explained as they walked. Been here since the 1850s. Lot of tragedy in that family, especially around the turn of the century. They found Elizabeth's grave in a corner of the family plot, overshadowed by a massive oak tree. The headstone, though weathered, was still legible. Elizabeth Marie Hartley, April 3rd, 1889, September 15th, 1911. Love eternal. Margaret knelt beside the grave, placing a small bouquet of flowers against the stone. I should have come sooner, she murmured. Family should remember family. Thomas cleared his throat. There's something you should know about this particular grave. My predecessor, old Charlie Wentworth, left notes about unusual occurrences in this section of the cemetery. According to his records, the Hartley plot has always been troublesome. Emma looked up sharply. Troublesome how? Cameras malfunction here regularly, Thomas said. Wedding photographers especially. They've learned to avoid this section entirely. The digital ones just shut down, and the old film cameras would produce double exposures or strange shadows. Charlie's notes mention that it started right after Elizabeth Hartley's burial in 1911. Sarah had been examining the headstone closely and noticed something odd. Look at this, she said, pointing to the base of the stone. These marks here, they look like scratch marks, but they're coming from inside the ground, pushing outward. Thomas nodded grimly. Those appeared about 20 years ago. Ground shifted, they said, natural settling. But Charlie didn't think so. He said it looked like something trying to claw its way out. A sudden gust of wind rustled through the oak leaves above, and Margaret shivered despite the warm evening air. The family stories say Elizabeth was buried in her best dress, wearing the crescent moon brooch. It was William's wish. He wanted her to have it for eternity. About that, Thomas interjected. There's a record I found while preparing for your visit, the cemetery log from September 18th, 1911. He pulled out a photocopy from his jacket. The burial record notes something unusual. The coffin was sealed with extra reinforcement at the family's request. Specifically, William Morrison insisted on it, said it was to ensure eternal rest. Emma frowned. That's an odd phrase. Why would he think she needed to be ensured eternal rest? They spent the next hour exploring the surrounding area, taking photographs and notes. Sarah noticed that her digital camera began acting strangely as they neared Elizabeth's grave. The autofocus wouldn't lock, and several images showed inexplicable light anomalies. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cemetery, Thomas led them to a small storage building near the entrance. "There's one more thing," he said, producing an old ledger. "This is the visitor log from October 1911. Look at the entry for October 7th, the day of the wedding." The entry, written in fading ink, sent chills through all three women. October 7th, 1911. Groundskeeper Jacob Mills reports disturbance at Hartley Plot. Flowers from recent burials scattered, despite no wind. Fresh earth around grave appears disturbed, as if pressed down from below. Father Mackenzie called to perform blessing. No further incidents reported. Note, this date corresponds with the Whitmore-Coleman wedding at St. Mary's Church. "My God," Margaret whispered. The same day, the exact same day Elizabeth appeared in the photograph. Thomas closed the ledger carefully. "There's a local legend among the groundskeepers. They say on foggy October evenings, especially around the 7th, you can sometimes smell lavender perfume near the Hartley Plot. And once in a while, visitors report seeing a young woman in an Edwardian dress standing by the grave, wearing a brooch that catches the moonlight." As they prepared to leave, Sarah took one last photograph of Elizabeth's headstone. When she reviewed it on her camera's LCD screen, her blood ran cold. In the image, superimposed over the headstone, was the faint but unmistakable outline of a woman's face. The same haunting expression they had seen in the wedding photograph. "We should go," Emma said quickly, her scientific rationalism finally crumbling. "We should go now." As they hurried toward the cemetery exit, none of them noticed the fresh lavender bloom that had appeared on Elizabeth's grave, its purple petals vivid against the weathered stone. Nor did they see the figure standing in the shadows of the oak tree, watching them leave with eyes as dark as a moonless night. Back at Sarah's restoration studio, the three women sat in tense silence, struggling to process what they had discovered. The restored wedding photograph remained on the main monitor, Elizabeth Hartley's impossible presence, a constant reminder of the mystery they had uncovered. Emma had spent the evening researching every possible scientific explanation. Pareidolia, double exposure techniques, even early photographic hoaxes. But each theory crumbled under scrutiny. The photograph's authenticity had been verified by 3 independent experts, and the image quality was too precise to be accidental. "I found something," Margaret said suddenly, looking up from her laptop. "I've been searching genealogy databases, and I discovered what happened to the photographer, Josiah Blackwood." She turned the screen toward the others. "He closed his studio just 6 months after the wedding. His final journal entry, preserved in the Salem Historical Society, mentions the Whitmore wedding photograph that haunts my dreams. He never took another photograph." Sarah pulled up her enhanced analysis of the image. "I've been studying the technical aspects all evening. Look at this infrared scan." The screen showed a heat map overlay of the photograph. Every person in this image shows consistent thermal patterns from the original silver nitrate process, except Elizabeth. Her figure registers differently, as if she were photographed using another method entirely. "Or at another time," Emma added quietly, her scientific skepticism finally abandoned. The clock on the wall chimed midnight, and as if on cue, Sarah's computer screen flickered. The women watched in growing horror as the restored photograph seemed to shift and change. Elizabeth's figure, previously static, appeared to move ever so slightly, her head turning a fraction more toward Eleanor. "That's impossible," Sarah breathed. "It's a still image. It can't—" Her words were cut short as the lights in the studio dimmed. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the familiar scent of lavender filled the air. Margaret gripped Emma's hand tightly as they watched the photograph continue its impossible transformation. In the image, Elizabeth's lips seemed to part, as if she were trying to speak across the gulf of years. Her hand, previously hidden in the folds of her dress, became visible, reaching toward Eleanor's throat where the pearl necklace lay. Sarah's restoration equipment began to malfunction, screens flickering with static. Through the interference, they could see other images appearing. Elizabeth in her coffin, the crescent moon brooch gleaming on her chest, William Morrison placing flowers on her grave, Eleanor clutching her throat on her wedding night, gasping for breath. "She kept her promise," Margaret whispered. "She said she would be at the wedding one way or another." The temperature continued to drop, and their breath became visible in the cold air. On the main monitor, the wedding photograph had transformed completely. Elizabeth no longer stood in the background. She had moved forward, standing directly behind Eleanor, her face a mask of sorrow and rage frozen in time. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The lights returned to normal, the temperature rose, and the photograph reverted to its restored state. Elizabeth back in her original position, eternally watching, eternally waiting. Emma was the first to speak, her voice shaky. "We need to make a decision. Do we publish these findings? Do we tell the world what we've discovered?" Sarah saved all her files to multiple backups, her hands trembling. The historical value alone, but the implications. Margaret stood slowly, her decision made. "No," she said firmly. "Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Some stories are too painful to fully tell." She looked at the photograph one last time. Elizabeth has been standing in that photograph for over a century, bearing witness to a love that was never hers. Perhaps it's time to let her rest. They agreed to keep the original photograph and their research materials, but to present only a standard restoration to the Historical Society. The true image, the one showing Elizabeth Hartley's impossible presence, would remain their secret. As they prepared to leave the studio, Sarah noticed something on her computer screen. The metadata for the restored file had changed. The timestamp now showed two dates, October 7th, 1911 and September 15th, 1911, the day of the wedding and the day of Elizabeth's death, forever intertwined in a single image. 3 months after their discovery, Margaret received a package with no return address. Inside was a small, tarnished crescent moon brooch and a note in spidery handwriting. "She wants you to have this. She's tired of watching. WM." The brooch matched the one in the photograph exactly. Margaret had it analyzed. It dated to the early 1900s and showed signs of having been buried for decades. William Morrison had died in 1963, taking whatever secrets he knew to his grave. The wedding photograph now hangs in Margaret's home, a family heirloom with a dark secret. Sometimes, late at night, she swears she can smell lavender and hear the rustle of an Edwardian dress, but when she looks, the photograph remains unchanged. Elizabeth forever frozen in that moment, forever present at the wedding she swore to attend. Some nights, Margaret wonders if Elizabeth is finally at peace, or if she remains trapped in that eternal moment, bearing witness to a love that should have been hers. The truth, like Elizabeth herself, remains suspended between two worlds, neither fully alive nor completely dead, captured forever in silver and shadow. The crescent moon brooch sits in Margaret's jewelry box, too heavy with history to wear, too significant to discard. And somewhere in Salem, in a grave beneath an old oak tree, the earth remains undisturbed, holding its secrets close. But photographs, as we've learned, can capture more than just moments. They can capture promises, heartbreak, and sometimes the impossible presence of those who refuse to be forgotten. What do you think really happened in that photograph? Was it Elizabeth's spirit, captured by early photography, a tragic coincidence, or something else entirely? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love hearing your theories. If this story gave you chills, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. I have more historical mysteries and unexplained photographs to share with you. And remember, the next time you look at an old family photograph, look closely. You never know who might be looking back. Until next time, keep questioning, keep wondering, and remember, some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. End of video script.